Everyday pocket change might seem pretty unremarkable at first glance. But some coins, even recent ones, have stories that collectors dream about, hidden gems hiding in plain sight. Today, we're diving into three US 1-cent coins that have gained serious attention from seasoned collectors and sharp-eyed individuals alike: the 2015, the 1967, and the 1988 Lincoln pennies. These coins don't just carry monetary value. They carry history, quirks, and mystery. And if you happen to own one, you could be holding on to something much more valuable than you think. Let's start with the 2015 Lincoln penny. Now, you wouldn't think much of a coin minted less than a decade ago, but this one shook the collector community in a way most modern coins rarely do. At a glance, it looks like any other Lincoln cent. The familiar profile of Abraham Lincoln faces right, with "In God We Trust" arcing over his head and "Liberty" stamped to the left. On the reverse, the Union Shield, a design introduced in 2010, sits proudly. But what turned this coin from mundane to magnificent isn't the design, it's the errors. In 2015, a small number of Lincoln cents were struck with what's known as a double die error. Specifically, we're talking about the 2015 double die obverse, often abbreviated as DDO. The doubling is most noticeable in the inscriptions, particularly in "Liberty" and "In God We Trust." To the untrained eye, it might look like a smudge or shadow, but under magnification, it's clear that the letters have been struck twice, slightly offset. Double dies occur during the minting process when the die used to stamp the coin shifts or is impressed more than once in a misaligned way. These aren't post-minting scratches or damage. This is something that happens before the coin even leaves the US Mint. That makes these errors especially prized, because they're a result of the production process itself. Now here's where it gets exciting. One of these 2015 double die pennies in brilliant, uncirculated condition has fetched over $1,200 at auction. That's a serious leap from its face value of 1 cent. Even coins that are just in lightly circulated condition, think minor pocket wear, can go for over $100. And since this isn't a centuries-old coin, many of them are still in circulation, waiting to be found. People aged 40 and up, especially those with an eye for detail, might even have one sitting in a jar at home, unrecognized. But the story doesn't end with just one error. The 2015 Lincoln cent also produced a handful of other anomalies: off-center strikes, die cracks, and even a few with missing letters. One particular specimen with a dramatic off-center strike, where Lincoln's head is partially sliced off the coin, was recently appraised at over $400. The key here is condition. Coins in mint state, graded MS, 65 or higher, are where the money really starts to climb. Circulated versions, especially with clear error visibility, still bring solid returns, but they won't reach those top dollar sales unless they're exceptionally well preserved. Interestingly, the 2015 double die penny wasn't widely known until a few years after it was minted. It began popping up in online forums and collector groups, where sharp-eyed hobbyists noticed the strange doubling. Once confirmed, the scramble began. Collectors across the country started examining their change more closely, especially rolls of pennies from banks. For some, it became a daily ritual: grab a roll, break it open, inspect under magnification, repeat. One fascinating anecdote comes from a retired schoolteacher in Kansas who found 3 of these in a single bankroll in 2019. She hadn't collected coins seriously in years, but after hearing about the error from a friend, she got curious. That 3-cent discovery turned into a $2,400 auction payout and reignited her passion for coin hunting. Collectors also appreciate the 2015 error penny because it represents a rare instance of a modern mint mistake. The US Mint has invested heavily in quality control over the past few decades, so dramatic errors like this are fewer and farther between. That scarcity, especially for coins in top condition, is part of what drives up their value and mystique. Another factor is the emotional draw. For many collectors in the 40 to 50 plus age range, Lincoln cents were often their first introduction to coin collecting. So when something new and valuable pops up in such a familiar series, it hits a nostalgic chord. And since these errors can still be found in circulation, it brings back that childhood thrill of discovery. It's a reminder that even in the digital age, treasures can still be found in your pocket. So what should you look for if you want to spot one? Start with the inscriptions. Look closely at Liberty and In God We Trust. You want to see crisp doubling, not a blur or wear. Use a magnifying glass or a jeweler's loupe. 10x magnification is ideal. Next, check the date and mint mark, if visible. Make sure it's a genuine 2015 and not a similar but less valuable variety. And always examine the coin under good lighting to catch the fine details. Condition matters a lot. A well-struck error with sharp features, no scratches, and bright copper luster will always bring more interest than a coin that's been bouncing around in circulation for years. If you think you've got something promising, it's worth getting it graded by a reputable service like PCGS or NGC. That certification can make the difference between a coin that sells for a few hundred and one that brings in over 1,000. In a world where many think only old or gold coins have value, the 2015 Lincoln cent proves that even recent coins can punch way above their weight. All it takes is the right combination of rarity, error, and condition. And sometimes, all it takes is a little curiosity and a close look. Next, we're rewinding the clock back to the summer of love, 1967, to look at a coin that might seem ordinary but has earned a place in collector history for entirely different reasons. A year of change, music, protest, and, believe it or not, a rather curious little penny that's become a favorite for seasoned collectors. Now, this coin doesn't immediately scream valuable. In fact, it's one of those that can easily go unnoticed in a drawer, a dusty old piggy bank, or wedged in the back of a kitchen junk drawer. But for those who know what to look for, the 1967 Lincoln cent holds more than a touch of mystery, and in some cases, real value. First, a bit of background. The 1967 penny was part of a transitional period for U.S. coinage. Just a couple of years prior, in 1965, the U.S. Mint had removed silver from most circulating coins due to rising metal costs. The public had grown suspicious of changes in coinage, leading to hoarding and general mistrust. To combat this, the Mint temporarily suspended the use of mint marks between 1965 and 1967. That's right, there's no D for Denver, no S for San Francisco, just a blank space where a mint mark would normally be. That alone sets the 1967 penny apart in the Lincoln cent series. And here's something that makes this coin even more unique. 1967 was a monster year for penny production. Over 3 billion were minted, mostly at Philadelphia. That makes finding a rare one all the more challenging, which is part of why error coins from this year stand out so sharply. We're talking about double strikes, off-center strikes, die cracks, and the elusive double die varieties. The most notable and collectible among these errors is the 1967 double die obverse, similar to what we saw in the 2015, but more subtle in execution. The doubling in the 1967 version can often be spotted in Lincoln's eye, parts of his profile, and occasionally in the motto above his head. These aren't bold, cartoonish doubles. They're finer, more ghost-like. But for collectors with a trained eye, that slight doubling makes all the difference. So what's one of these beauties worth? A pristine example of a 1967 double die penny, in mint state 65 or better, can fetch between $200 and $1,000 depending on the visibility of the doubling and the overall eye appeal. In one notable auction, a sharply struck MS 66 red example with strong doubling sold for just over $1,500. On the flip side, if you have a circulated version, one that's been around the block a few times, you're looking at anywhere from $20 to $100. Not bad for something that could still be hiding in a coin jar. Now, a quick word about color. You'll hear collectors use the terms red, red-brown, and brown to describe copper coins. These don't refer to paint, of course. They're about the surface coloration caused by age, exposure, and oxidation. A full red 1967 penny in mint state is what commands the big bucks. Red-brown examples, while still collectible, tend to see lower prices, and fully brown coins, unless they're in exceptional condition or show a rare error, typically bring more modest returns. One fascinating tidbit. Because of the mint mark suspension, 1967 is sometimes referred to as a ghost year among collectors. People who don't know this piece of minting history might mistakenly think their coin is a misprint or even counterfeit because it lacks that small but expected letter under the date. It's not an error, it was intentional. But that decision still colors how people see and value these coins today. Let's talk about one of the more dramatic types of 1967 errors, the off-center strike. These occur when a coin isn't properly seated in the press during striking, resulting in a lopsided image, sometimes so off-center that half of Lincoln's head is missing. These errors can range from 5% to over 80% off-center. The more off-center the strike, without losing the date, the higher the value. One collector recently snagged an 80% off-center 1967 penny with a full visible date for $450. Die cracks and cuds also add value. A cud is a blob of metal that appears where a chunk of the die has broken off, leaving an unintentional raised area on the coin. These are visually striking and can turn an otherwise ordinary penny into a standout piece. Prices vary widely, but one dramatic cud error on a 1967 cent brought in over $300 online. The real kicker with 1967 pennies is how many are hiding in plain sight. Because of the enormous number minted and their relatively recent production compared to early 20th century coins, a lot of these are still floating around. People who were kids in the late 60s and early 70s may have kept jars or rolls of pennies just for fun, and those hoards are prime hunting ground for errors. Take the story of a man in Ohio who had been storing rolls of pennies since high school. He finally decided to sift through them during a home renovation and found not one, but two 1967 double-die obverse cents in nearly mint condition. Those 2 cents, literally, ended up earning him close to $2,800 combined at auction. For collectors in their 40s, 50s, and beyond, the 1967 penny is a perfect bridge between nostalgia and serious collecting. It's a reminder of a pivotal time in American history, reflected in something as simple as a copper coin. And because it doesn't look rare at first glance, it continues to surprise. If you've got a 1967 penny sitting around, give it a second look. Hold it up to the light. Check for unusual doubling, irregular edges, or odd shapes in the metal. And if the color is still bright, even better. You might just be holding on to a miniature piece of monetary history, with more value than you ever expected. Next, we're jumping forward 2 decades to look at a coin from 1988. It's a penny that seems completely ordinary, until you take a much closer look at one tiny detail just below Lincoln's shoulder. 1988 might feel like a quiet year for coins. Nothing too flashy, no massive changes in design, and definitely not the kind of era most people associate with rare finds. But for collectors who know what to look for, the 1988 Lincoln penny hides one of the most subtle yet significant errors in the entire Lincoln cent series. And it all comes down to a tiny detail that 99% of people overlook: the initials just under Lincoln's right shoulder on the obverse side. Let's start with the basics. The 1988 Lincoln cent looks exactly like millions of other pennies minted in the late 80s. You've got Lincoln's right-facing profile, the standard inscriptions, "In God We Trust" at the top, "Liberty" to the left, and the date, 1988, to the right. No surprises. On the reverse side, it still carries the image of the Lincoln Memorial, which had been featured on the penny since 1959 to honor Lincoln's 150th birthday. Pretty straightforward, right? But now comes the twist. The U.S. Mint uses what's called a master hub to create working dies, which then stamp each coin. In 1988, the Mint was already transitioning between 2 reverse designs that were nearly identical to the naked eye, but different in one subtle detail: the style of the designer's initials, FG, short for Frank Gasparo. Here's the key. The 1988 obverse die was paired with the wrong reverse die in a small number of cases, specifically one intended for the next year's 1989 cents. This created what's known today as the 1988 wide AM transitional reverse error. Now, if that sounds technical, don't worry. Here's what you really need to know. On a normal 1988 penny, the letters A and M in America on the reverse are touching or nearly touching. But on this rare error version, the A and M are clearly spaced apart. A detail from the reverse die meant for 1989 proofs, not regular 1988 business strikes. The initials FG are also slightly different. On the error, they appear bolder and closer to the Lincoln Memorial base than on standard 1988 cents. This wasn't intentional. It was a mismatch during die setup, and only a relatively small number of these transitional errors made it into circulation. That tiny change, it turned this coin into one of the most sought-after modern Lincoln cents. So how much are we talking? A genuine 1988 wide AM penny in mint state can easily command $500 to $1,000 or more, depending on grade and luster. In fact, a brilliant uncirculated example graded MS 65 red by PCGS sold at auction for a whopping $3,000. Even circulated versions can fetch between $75 and $250 if the spacing is clear and the coin isn't overly worn. And here's the kicker. These are still out there. Because the error wasn't discovered until years after the coins had entered circulation, many of these slipped by unnoticed. They've been hiding in collections, change jars, and old rolls ever since. Collectors in their 40s, 50s, and up, especially those who saved coins during their childhood or teen years, might very well have one without realizing it. The difference between a common cent and a rare one here can literally come down to a fraction of a millimeter in letter spacing. Interestingly, the 1988 wide AM penny also helped spark a wave of interest in transitional errors, those oddball coins that occur when the mint shifts from one design to another and something goes awry in the changeover. It wasn't the first transitional error, but it's one of the best known from the Lincoln Memorial era and helped shine a spotlight on other similar finds. Stories from collectors about finding this coin are some of the most exciting in the hobby. One particularly memorable tale involves a Michigan retiree who'd been sorting through old coffee cans of pennies with his grandson. After spotting the unusually spaced M on a 1988 penny, he looked it up online, sent it in for grading, and ended up with an MS 64 example worth over $2,000. It became a moment of generational bonding, and a pretty profitable one at that. Condition plays a massive role here, as always. If you've got a 1988 penny that might be a wide AM, first check the spacing between A and M in America. If there's visible daylight between them, you're off to a good start. Next, look at the FG initials to see if they match the style seen on later proofs. From there, grading comes into play. Coins with minimal wear, no major nicks or scratches, and strong red coloration will always carry a premium. Red, brown, and brown versions can still bring in decent returns, but the top auction values go to those bright, uncirculated pieces. And here's an extra bonus tip. Some collectors build what's called a transitional error set, collecting coins like the 1988 wide AM, the 1992 close AM, and the 1998 to 2000 wide AMs. These sets often fetch even higher value when sold as a group, especially if they include high-grade examples. That puts the 1988 wide AM not just in demand as a standalone piece, but as a key part of a broader, high-value collecting strategy. One final word on authentication. Because this error is known and widely searched for, fakes do exist. Some altered coins have had their spacing artificially manipulated or been created from damaged dies. If you believe you found one, it's worth sending it to PCGS or NGC for official grading and verification. Having it slabbed by a reputable service not only proves authenticity, but also locks in its market value. So, while the 1988 penny might look like pocket change to the average person, to the trained eye, it could represent a once-in-a-decade find. The difference is in the details that most people never stop to look at. And for collectors who appreciate nuance, history, and the occasional stroke of minting luck, this little cent from the late 80s is anything but ordinary. When you bring together the 2015 doubled die, the 1967 mint markless errors, and the 1988 wide AM, you get a trio of Lincoln cents that span generations and defy expectations. Whether it's a recent release or a half-century-old relic, each coin tells a story of human error, sharp eyes, and the thrill of finding gold in copper.